Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. In this episode, we're going to answer your latest round of listener questions for July of 2026. We get a little bit of an easy button this time, Justin. I think some of these are fairly straightforward. We've had some pretty detailed technical questions the last few weeks, and these get into questions about, what's happening on my minerals or in my area. Can you give insight into that? And so we'll talk about that specifically for these specific questions, but then talk in generality about how you can actually go about and find this information out for yourself, because ultimately that's why we're here, to educate you so that you're empowered to know enough to find out where your minerals are located, what the activity is. And that's really the premise of all that we do here on the show.
Yeah, and these are the common questions. Every mineral owner kind of goes through this thought process at some point with their assets. Let's dive in here. So Dan asked, I've inherited some mineral rights in Petroleum County, Montana, which is in the Cat Creek oil field. All are sucker wells, which is in the Heath Formation. Is the Heath Formation basically a dead formation? I think there has been some drilling in the area during the time of the Bakken boom with no or poor results. Thanks for all the good and helpful information you put out. And thank you, Dan, for the question. But Matt, this is always an interesting one and something that gets asked a lot. But history has kind of shown that things can change. Technology changes what we're capable of doing, and what maybe wasn't a previously profitable area with new technology could be a profitable area.
Yeah, that's right. We just don't know what's going to happen in the future. That's why we generally say it's a good idea to just hold on to your minerals, particularly if they're in an area with not a lot of activity. You're not going to get much in terms of value for them if you were to sell, just because when you sell to a mineral buyer, they're looking for near-term return on investment. Otherwise, they're not able to offer very much. So in that situation, you might as well hold on to it and see what happens. And particularly specifically with the Petroleum County, Montana, I looked it up, and Dan and I sent some emails back and forth. And the situation where we're at right now is there's not a lot of activity right now. There haven't been permits that have been filed lately. So like you mentioned, Justin, I think it's a good insight is that, there may be future activity beyond the Heath Formation in this case, which is a conventional play. And so whether, if the Bakken didn't pan out, maybe there's some other, maybe it's Three Forks, maybe there's other formations in that area that, or even deeper things that aren't even really being looked at right now. But, more than likely it's played out. It's probably just sort of, as the conventional play keeps producing, I wouldn't say it's a dead formation, but, I wouldn't expect a lot of widespread drilling. There may be, conventional wells drilled here and there to go after areas that haven't been developed yet, but it'd be sporadic, and it would probably not be a widespread resource play like the Bakken if it was tested and proven to not be economic, at least at current prices or current technology. One thing I will say about the Bakken in general, and this gets to a question we'll talk about in a minute, is refracs are possible. So that's when they go in and recomplete the well to extract additional oil and gas out of an existing formation. So that could be another possibility here for the Heath Formation, or maybe they could go in and do a water flood where they do enhanced oil recovery to extract just a little bit more. Just because when both conventional and unconventional wells, horizontal wells are drilled, we only get between, let's say, 5 to 20% of the oil in place out in the first go round. So operators, as technology develops, they can inject things down in like water and CO2 to push out additional oil. And that's called enhanced oil recovery. So we're learning more and more about technology. Operators are testing different chemicals and fluids to pump down hole to extract more and more, incremental oil and gas. And so it's possible that we could get more from existing formations just by going in and refracking or by using enhanced oil recovery. So time will tell though. So hopefully, fingers crossed, Dan, that something does happen.
And you made an interesting mention, Matt, in that in these areas, when you have mineral rights, if there's not a lot of activity going on, it can be pretty difficult to get an offer that makes sense. They're really trying to tie that to a clear return on investment. So these properties can be tricky to get rid of. And We hear from a lot of mineral owners that have non-producing properties they'd like to sell, but unfortunately, that's not the best time to sell. Not that you can't. All right, Matt. Our next one here is from Roger. Roger says, Matt, my property is located in Red River Parish, Louisiana. We have 7 wells in the area. Is this a valuable natural gas area? And will Expand Energy continue to develop additional wells in my area? Any information on the future of natural gas in that area would be greatly appreciated. Man, this is always $1 million question. Every mineral owner would love to know exactly what the plans are of operators where they own minerals.
Yeah, and Roger, unfortunately, I don't have any more insight into Expand Energy's drilling schedule than you do. And I would suggest that just to contact their owner relations department to ask them, what their plans are. And sometimes they can give you some general idea of whether is additional drilling planned or what the deal is. Most of the time they won't, but occasionally they do share their plans. In fact, I was working with a client that has some interest on the East Texas side of the Haynesville. Rogers, that legal description that he provided in his email, and Red River Parish is in Louisiana, and the Haynesville side of that's the big natural gas play for those who may not be familiar. In that case, so I was helping a client sell interests, and they had permits, and the landman with the operator was able to share what their plans were in general terms. Obviously things can change and all of those caveats, but he said, well, here's the general plan to build, drill this many wells and to build one new well pad per year. And here's kind of the sequence that we're looking at. And so that was very helpful in providing insight and informing her decision whether or not to hold on to those minerals or to sell, and just to know what she was getting into. But in your case, Roger, I would highly recommend contacting Expand Energy's owner relations department. If you have 7 wells in that area that you're getting royalties on, that sort of well density, just looking at the Sunris website and well database as well, in terms of what the Louisiana Oil and Gas Commission information and seeing what's there. So if you already have 7 sections or 7 wells in your section, that's probably all I would expect for now. It could be, again, like we talked about, and we talk about always, that maybe there's some additional formations or different things that are tested in the future. But for the Haynesville, looks like about that's about the maximum well density. A couple of wells could get drilled, additionally, or maybe you'd see some recompletions like we've been talking about. But just in general, I'll say, because this theme I'm seeing in this particular episode is, some very specific questions about areas, where folks own minerals. And I will say that is why I created my mineral management basics course, is to teach you how to do a basic title search to get copies of deeds and oil and gas leases and important documents like that. And then also to go to the State Oil and Gas Commission website to locate your property on a map and to research current activity, and then also be able to download the well files for your existing wells, and all of that to help educate you on how to navigate those systems, to be informed about activity level. Because oftentimes when you get an unsolicited purchase offer, it's because something is happening in your area and the buyer knows more than you do, unless you're doing this type of research on your own and kind of staying on top of things. And so it's really to help level the playing field between you and the operators and the mineral buyers out there, just so you're informed and you can make an informed decision on how do you want to manage your minerals to make the most of that asset that you've been bestowed upon. So that's basically the course. And, to answer your question, Roger, highly recommend, if you're interested in actively managing your property, to take a look at that course. You can find it at mineralrightspodcast.com/courses. You can find out more about that to see if it's a good fit for what you want to do with your property. Thanks again for writing in.
And our next one here is from Greg. Greg says, I've appreciated your show for years, and I have a few questions. You've given updates on the Permian region. How about the Haynesville? He goes on to say, is there a way to discover if an operator is going to refrac a well? He has one more question, Matt, but let's cover those first.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It's a great question. And that is where, again, going and being familiar with the State Oil and Gas Commission website and seeing what operators are filing there. They often will file a sundry notice or other applications when they go to refrac a well. So you'll be able to see if that is something that's happening in your area. And then particularly on your minerals, you would see those types of permits or those types of applications filed with the State Oil and Gas Commission to get approval to do that before they go and do that. So if you're seeing those sundry notices or those applications to recomplete, that would be an indication that they are planning on doing that in your area. And again, that's just really through that State Oil and Gas Commission, which is publicly available information, in all the states across the country. And whether that's the Haynesville or if it's in the Permian, so you're in this case, Texas, Louisiana, if you're getting into Arkansas, Colorado, Wyoming, all of those sites are slightly different, but they, have similar information you can find that will tell you what's planned.
And he goes on to ask a more detailed question here, and with the backstory. So the context is that Greg's sister and himself inherited rights, which trace back to their great-great aunt, who purchased 1,000 or so acres in 1895. Many of the acres were sold, but there were some that were stolen illegally, and they have letters from the court saying so during the mid-1950s, they believe. He doesn't think the land was ever recovered, and he asked, could they be entitled to a portion or all of the rights? And Matt, that's a question that's way over my pay grade. I'm sure that gets into some really technical legal aspects.
Yeah, and I would say that sounds like a very, very much a question for an attorney, Greg. So highly recommend getting help from a qualified attorney, an oil and gas attorney in particular. I'm not sure what state it's located in. You mentioned Haynesville, so I don't know if that's Louisiana. Louisiana does have an interesting and very different way that they handle dormant mineral rights. So they have a mineral servitude, which basically when you have producing royalties, you can have a severed mineral interest and have a separate royalty owner from the surface owner in that situation. But then once those minerals are non-producing for a certain period of time, they have a dormant mineral law that will revert those minerals back to the surface owner. So it's very important to exert your ownership. There's certain steps to take to ensure that your severed mineral rights are protected in that type of situation and in other states with dormant mineral statutes. So yeah, probably a good idea to get with an attorney to get some assistance and look at the very specific situation that you have in the documents and et cetera, and to see what your rights are, if any, and whether you can go after those additional minerals. And it's something that you still have claim to. So hopefully that helps.
And a good consultation with an oil and gas attorney in that state will probably answer a lot of questions for you and at least help you understand what you can do and what to do before you move forward. Our next one here, Matt, is from Nancy. Nancy asks, how much is the course? I just need help finding trustworthy brokers and lawyers. I've had many offers, but I've realized they've crawled up from under a rock and are trying to scam me. Any help would be appreciated. And Matt, to kind of set the context for folks, being a mineral owner often means that we receive offers in the mail trying to purchase our minerals. And when they're sending those offers out, they're often lowball offers. They're sending out a number that is safe for them. And the way to protect yourself is to educate yourself. Many people can take advantage of what you don't know, but the way to solve that is by understanding and being able to have an educated conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the more you know, the more that you'll be at the same level with the potential mineral buyer if you are looking at selling, because then you can have an informed conversation with them about their underwriting criteria. How are they looking at future development? And if you both know what the activity level is, many of the reputable mineral buyers that I speak with, like to have an educated mineral owner on the other side, because it helps them, because there's less education they have to do. And then also they know whether somebody's, serious. If they understand, okay, there's development that's occurring. I have permits that are on my minerals. I know what the value is. It's sort of peak value. We're talking from the same sheet of music around expectations, around price based on that activity level. Oftentimes, sometimes not, but oftentimes if you have an educated mineral owner, then they are better situated to negotiate, a deal. And oftentimes with your situation, Nancy, where you have those unsolicited offers, like Justin said, they're sending those out just to see who will respond. And from there, if they do get somebody that's interested, then they would potentially negotiate a price. And just know that any initial offer that you get is typically has some room to go up. And so Obviously, you'd want to get multiple purchase offers if you are considering selling. Finding a trustworthy broker, like you suggest, Nancy, is a good idea because they can do a valuation for you to help you set a realistic sales price target, and then also to help you get multiple offers to negotiate from. I do provide those services for clients and as part of our advisory services. And then from finding a trustworthy attorney, I would highly recommend joining NARO. That's the National Association of Royalty Owners. With NARO, we have a provider directory. So that's service providers that have supported NARO over the years, and they are listed in a directory. So that business supporter directory is one of the member benefits you get when you join NARO. If you're not a member, you can get your first year for only $50. So that includes a $25 off coupon code that being a listener of this podcast, you can use. Just use the coupon code MRPodcast at checkout to get that $25 off, and then join NARO and get all the member benefits, including past webinars and all sorts of educational materials, including our monthly newsletters. So highly recommend every mineral owner that is taking an interest in managing their property, you should become a member of NARO.
And Matt, to that effect, in many of the local chapters, a lot of these different questions, understanding the geology of the land and the areas and the states may absolutely help you to understand and answer the questions about future production. That said, our next question from Barry here is in that same theme. So Barry says that he has some minerals in Taba, New Mexico. They're in the counties of Dabaca and Roosevelt. And his grandfather purchased the rights. He inherited them, but there were never any explorations or studies in the minerals of the land that he knows of. He goes on to say that he's really curious if Dabaca and Roosevelt counties may have future production of oil and gas, and if there's any information available to see what could be going on. And Matt, this fits the theme, which our typical answer to this is take a look at the Oil and Gas Commission for the state's website and see if they have any useful information.
That's exactly right. And that's my advice here, Barry, is that, to check that out and really know for yourself. I would go and watch our YouTube video that we recorded on how to navigate the New Mexico Oil and Gas Commission website. And using that, the legal description, you need more than just you can navigate the map if you're familiar with the area and find it just by a road description like you gave in your email. But I would highly recommend getting the full legal description from your mineral deed or from an oil and gas lease to find out exactly where it is. And from there, you can go to the State Oil and Gas Commission website, use that legal description to find your property, then see how close horizontal drilling is happening. And that'll help inform the relative likelihood of future drilling occurring on your property. If you're very far away from anything, then it's probably likely that nothing is going to happen for a long time, or maybe never, unfortunately, just based on what we know today. Now, not to say that, like we've always talked about, and we've mentioned it earlier in the show, that something could be discovered in the future in a different formation, and that could open up potential for drilling. But right now, it looks like Dabaca County, there's really not much going on there as far as drilling. But, again, to stay on top of this, familiarize yourself with the New Mexico Oil and Gas Commission website. And then again, if you don't have copies of those mineral deeds and leases and want to learn how to find them, I walk through step by step on how to do that, as well as all the other important documents you should have. And then the important differences between the different types of oil and gas interests, just to lay the foundation. Again, that my course has all that information where you can find more at mineralrightspodcast.com/courses. So one thing I will mention with New Mexico is they have generally a good website, but unfortunately they don't list the wellbores. They don't have the horizontal wellbore location on the map. So I recommend getting a free well database account to be able to visualize that, to see where those wells are going, because it's kind of not intuitive that you actually have to maybe go to the next section over, or a couple of sections over, to click on the wells to find wells that are going through your property. So you may look at the New Mexico Oil and Gas website, and it may look like there are no drilling planned, or there's no wells planned because there are no well permits in your section. But oftentimes those well permits will be a couple of sections over because they're drilling 2 or 3 mile lateral wells, certainly in Eddy and Lee County as an example. So if you go to well database, you can kind of use both those websites together. The well database to visualize if there are permits, and then where you can see where the surface hole location is, and then go to the New Mexico Oil and Gas Commission website to click on those permits to download them and see what where they're drilling specifically on the plat and whether that's going to go through your mineral tract. So that's what I would highly recommend. And you can find a link to well database in the resources section on the website as well. So good luck.
All right. Our next one here from David. David says, I'm a trustee of a family estate that has mineral rights in Howard County, Texas. His great-grandfather purchased the land and the mineral rights around 1900. They recently started receiving royalties from a new fracking well. So he's curious to learn how to make sure we're receiving the appropriate royalties. So another common question, Matt, from a middle owner, and a shameless plug for your course, because this is exactly the further on, once you get through the land documents, understanding how to read a check stub is another crucial part of learning the fundamentals of mineral management.
Yeah, and that is certainly in Howard County, and being in Texas, we have a video on the Texas Railroad Commission. So find the link to that. We'll have a link to that in the show notes where you can go and view that to find your property in Howard County, and then to download the plat and the well permit for those new wells that you're getting royalties on. And the way that you would confirm that the division of interest, so that decimal interest that shows up on your division order, to make sure that that's correct, you would need to have a copy of your well plat, understand your net interest and the full legal description of your tract and where it fits within the lease. And it could be that it is an allocation well. If that's the case, you can go back and listen to our episode on allocation wells. We talk about how those are calculated in Texas. And that's a very Texas specific thing where wells maybe cross multiple lease boundaries and you have to do some additional math to figure out your interest in those wells. And that's episode 304, where we talk about understanding Texas allocation wells and pooling. And so I highly recommend listening to that episode if you have minerals in Texas, because it's a unique animal there. But following those steps, whether it's a regular well, and you can just go back and we'll link again to the episode where we talk about how to calculate your net revenue interest, or if it's an allocation well, listen to episode 304. And from that, you can calculate those interests. If you get stuck, if you're running into difficulties figuring that out, David, just reach out. I'm happy to help out. I do provide consulting services, and that's a very common question that I help folks with. So, hopefully that helps.
And our last one here is a bit interesting. First, we don't hear about Kansas as much as some of the other states. And then this tax question is unique. So the listener here says, I own non-producing mineral rights in Phillips County, Kansas, and it's unique in that only the state charges property taxes. He says, over the last 20 years, I've regularly paid these taxes, but started thinking that it is pouring money down the drain since he's not receiving any royalties. So his question is, he is aware that if he was to take some kind of action like execute a lease or sell the properties, that the property rights would have to be current. But he asks, am I taking any risk losing the title to the mineral rights by not paying the current property taxes due? And Matt, I know in many states, the answer to that would be yes. They go through a tax auction, but I'm not sure I know how Kansas works. I
don't know Kansas either off the top of my head, but I'd say there's a high risk that you are going to lose it if you don't pay the property taxes due. Just like Justin said, whether it's a tax lien situation that could eventually go where the owner of that tax lien could apply for a treasurer's deed to take title to that property, or if it goes to a tax auction. Either way, the same result is that it would go to an auction where the highest bidder would purchase the property, and you would lose it if you don't pay the taxes. So whether you pay them now or pay them later, you kind of are stuck with, it's like death and taxes, where it's something we can't avoid. And you might as well stay up on paying the taxes. Otherwise, you're going to end up paying penalties and interest. Typically, non-producing minerals, the tax bill is very low. It's very small. I know it's a pain in the rear to have to deal with. Colorado is the same way. Maybe it's only $5 a year, but you have to pay those, because if you don't, then it'll go to tax lien auction, at least in Colorado. And then there's the chance after a certain period of time elapses that the owner of that tax lien will file for a treasurer's deed if it's in a desirable area. And ultimately, that's why they're looking to buy those. It's the option to get a title to those in addition to the interest that they would get from that investment. So unfortunately, that is something you just got to deal with if you want to keep them. Now, there's other options. Obviously, you could look to sell the interest if you're not thinking much is going to happen. You just want to offload it, not deal with it. I have had several listeners that have mentioned and have done that just because it's in an area that's out in the middle of nowhere. It's sort of like, I don't want to deal with this. I want to simplify my estate. I'm willing to sell them and understanding that it's not going to be a lot that you're going to get for them on a per acre basis, just if there's no drilling going on. But yeah, that's the sad fact, I guess, with taxes or the reality in that situation.
Yep, like you said, Matt, death and taxes, unavoidable, unfortunately.
That's right. So, well, that wraps up this month's listener questions episode. If you have a question you'd like us to answer, you can send it to feedback@mineralrightspodcast.com and we'll answer it on the air. Thanks again for listening. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.